have anything? Are you working on anything that's worthwhile? Again, don't trust your parents' opinion. Another idea is to get your pastor or a thought leader, a respected opinion leader, to hear your pitch. And if you get confirmation from them, then that's your first step. Okay. Here's something I really encourage people to do, especially these days. Now, if you're making, a mission project, if you're making a gospel kind of project, it's sometimes hard to find a true story. But it's important if you can, and I'll tell you why. True stories seem to resonate with the audience as opposed to fictional stories, especially when you're trying to communicate sort of the most important message in the universe. There is something about a true story that just grabs people and won't let them go. Here's the bonuses of a true story. They're more promotable. They provide credibility to you in the marketplace, whoever your audience is. They help your audience identify and relate and be able to put themselves in the story. They affirm real life as opposed to just being dismissed as entertainment. I hear this all the time from young people, my kids or their friends. When they hear that something is a true story, they want in on it, as opposed to just being a mindless piece of entertainment. Now, that doesn't mean that fiction can't be really good. I'm not trying to dismiss that. It can be, but it also comes with the baggage that it can be just looked at as a piece of eye candy, as entertainment only, as opposed to something that is communicating, the most powerful ideas in the universe, which is what I think we all share as people of faith. So true stories are huge to that process. And here's the bonus lesson from if you can find a true story. We found a true story in Journey to Jamaa. We believe that's why that piece is so effective. But the bonus is that, when you're making a documentary, you have to stay as close to the facts as possible. If you're making a narrative film, like we did with Journey to Jamaa, you want to stay as close to the facts as possible, but you can never let the facts get in the way of telling the most effective story. Excuse me. You have to use dramatic license sometimes. So a little reveal about Journey to Jamaa. Our two kids, Derek and Margaret, true kids, took their mom in that box, and the box broke down 3/4 of the way to the village that they were trying to get to find their aunt and uncle. All right, so they ended up going the rest of the way in a taxi. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not just a very satisfying way to finish the story. So we sort of avoided the taxi part because it just seemed wrong to us. We felt that the continuity of that box was more important than arriving with that mysterious box in their town, to at the little home of their mother's sister. That was far more important to us than these kids pulling up in a taxi with a body in the trunk. So anyway, I think you get my point. If you're telling a true story and you're making a documentary, then you got to stick with the facts. Don't take too much dramatic license in a documentary. You're already going to get some worldview bias, no matter what you do in the choices that you make in a documentary. But if you're making a narrative film, you got to stay as close as you can, but you never let those facts get in the way of being the most effective storyteller you can be. All right, my third lesson. Confirmation, number 1. True story, if you can, number 2. Do you have a gasp factor? Other people have called this the wow factor or the gee whiz factor. But when you're pitching this story, hopefully to somebody who you respect in the media, somebody who's worked the story for a long time, and I'm not saying you can't pitch to your parents or your Aunt Connie, but just remember, you can't only pitch to them. You need that respected opinion. When you're pitching your story, whether it's a true story or it's a fictional story that you've invented, this gas factor comes from the one idea that causes the biggest physical reaction from your audience. Are they gasp? Do they gasp? Do they catch their breath? Do they laugh? Do you get some misty eyes? What is the one thing that gets you a gasp factor? Now, in Journey to Jamaa, the gas factor in our story, as I'm sure you can imagine, comes when we were pitching the story and we tell people that these two little kids built a box. They went to the dump and found wood and wheels and everything, and they built a box, and they put their mother's body in this box because they could not leave her behind. That was a big gas factor for people. That's what made us gasp. That's what told us we had something really powerful. And you need at least one of those moments in your story, whether you're making a short film or if you're writing a novel. You know, this doesn't have to just be for filmmakers, although I suspect a lot of us are. You know, if you are telling a nonfiction story or you're writing a fictional novel, find the gas factor, find the one thing in your book, the big idea that causes people to have a physical reaction when you're telling them about it. Okay, point number 4. Do you have a strong character quest for your protagonist? And my friends who have been to my classes before know this is one of the big things that I push hard, is character quest. This is the most important spine in any story. Now you might say, well, if you're telling a true story, don't you have to just go with the character journey that's in the true story? Yes and no. If the character quest works, absolutely. If you need to tweak the character quest in true story, if you need to find what those motives are, sometimes, life is stranger than fiction. Truth is sometimes stranger than anything we could ever write, and sometimes it doesn't fit conveniently into a piece of entertainment. And so you might need to tweak that character quest. But there's only one kind of storytelling in which a protagonist does not grow. And by protagonist, if you're not familiar with that term, that means your hero. That's your central character. That's your main character. So there's only one kind of storytelling in which a protagonist doesn't grow. And that's the category of really bad storytelling. It's a no-no. It's never allowed if I'm around, I would say you're not allowed to do this. It's one of my rules. You can never tell a story in which your hero does not grow. A character that does not grow is a really poorly drawn character. Okay? Does that make sense? The only predictable thing about human nature is that it's always changing. That doesn't mean that people don't tend to repeat their histories, but, they're always morphing. They're always morphing to their circumstances. And well-drawn characters must go on personal quests or journeys. Our two children from Journey to Jamaa went on a physical journey for sure, but they went on a personal journey, and their personal journey was to become adults very quickly and fend for themselves and figure out how to survive, to find their new home, to find a home, because they were done in the slums. They had nowhere to go. They had no one to take care of them, and that sort of finding their quest in terms of facing their fears, in terms of learning how to fend for themselves. It was a huge quest for them. So they went on both a personal and a spiritual journey. If you watch the movie, which you can find at the website, you'll see the spiritual journey that they went on as well. You have to know your characters thoroughly. That means in a fictional story or a true story, you have to know those characters. You have to write some backstory on them. You got to know who they are and why they would do what they would do. And it's the only way to help your audience fall in love, by the way. Big plot twists in your story, big bomb blasts, people falling off cliffs, those do not help your audience fall in love. What helps your audience fall in love and want to go on the journey with you is the quest, right, that your main character has to go on. The only thing predictable about human nature, again, is that it always changes. Well-drawn characters go on personal quests. I can't say that enough. And it's a journey that goes from one point to another. So, for instance, from despair to hope, that's what we do with our two kids in Journey to Jamaa. From uncertainty to conviction, we also do that as well. Excuse me. You can go from animosity to love, right? From hate to love. You can also have a character quest that goes the other direction if you have a tragedy. Somebody who goes from hope to despair. Usually they come back to hope again just for a little brief moment at the end. But a journey always goes from one point to another, right? That's what it means to have a character growth. So that was point 4.5 out of 8 points before we get to our questions is, does your story have a natural 3-act structure? Now, you know, people have been involved in Act 1 or have taken screenwriting classes or read books. They know that screenplays, not television, not teleplays, but screenplays are always done in a 3-act structure. So there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the reason for this, it goes back all the way to, you know, Greek, you know, tragedies and all of the great drama from sort of the Greek dramatists. 3 acts seems to resonate with most human actions or interactions, whether it's real or fictional. There's always the point sort of before the action. There's always the point during the action. And then there's the point after the action. My friend Clyde was telling me a story at a meeting last week which totally describes this, something he went through with his wife, and I won't out him at this point. But there was a before the action, there was some excitement. There was during the action where the balloon got burst. Then there was after the action, which was about how to overcome that disappointment. And so every human sort of act falls into this structure, and so that's the reason, you know, 3-act structures really resonate with audiences, because they are so organic to us. Now, when you're creating this story, even if it's a short, you should try to do this. We did our Journey to Jamaa story in 3 acts, even though it's a short. Not real short, but it's also not real long. Act 1 is about who, right? That's introducing your character and his quest, and also some of the other characters in your story. Obviously, you're going to want to introduce all of your key central characters in the first act. But first act is about who, and it also poses the big question of the story, right? So in Jamaa, Journey to Jamaa, the big question of the story for us was not whether or not these kids are going to take their mama in a box. That's the big gasp factor in the story. The big question of the story was, will these 2 orphaned children survive? Will they find a new home? That was the big question of the story, and that is introduced as part of who. So Act 1 is about who. Act 2 is about what. And that's where you intensify the hero's quest with 1 million complications, or if you're doing a short, 3 complications. The rule of 3 should always apply. Minimum of 3. Act 2 is about what, right? So you intensify the quest with the complications, and by the end of Act 2, you're getting to sort of your big, giant plot turn, which is not the climax of the film, but it's the major plot turn in the movie or in the story. Act 3, and by the way, novelists, you're not working in film, this also applies to novels. You can talk to any great novelist, and they will tell you the same thing about writing a novel. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So Act 3 is about how who accomplishes the what. So this resolves the big quest, either tragically or triumphantly, and it also answers the big question that you set up in Act 1. The major question: will Derek and Margaret find a home? Yes, they do. At the end, they do find their home, but does not come easily and does not come without complications. Point 6 in our 8 parts. Do you know your ending? When you're starting your story, do you know your ending? Does your story, your true story, naturally build to an exciting or rewarding Act 3 climax or resolve? You should have an idea of what your ending is. You always build your story with the end in mind, or you will wind up with an end that is mindless. How's that for a little play on words? Always build the story with the end in mind, or you will wind up with an end that is mindless. I can't tell you how many scripts that I've read from young writers, new writers, where the end is just wrong. It just fizzles out. They have done a nice job of getting me through the end of Act 2, but they don't know how to end the movie. You've probably also had this experience in perhaps some books you've read or in some movies you've seen, even big Hollywood feature films, where they don't know how to end the movie. They have 5 endings to the movie, right? It just keeps going, because they can't figure out how to end the movie. You should always try to figure out ahead of time, what your ending is going to be, or at least know, generally speaking, what your ending is going to be in a rough sense, so that you can build to it, right? We knew that from the true story of Journey to Jamaa, that Derek and Margaret found a new home. They found their aunt and uncle. They were not immediately welcome in that home, but in the end, they were welcome in that home. And there were some complications there at the end in the 3rd act of the story that where they almost did not get to that ending. But we knew ultimately that they got to that ending. So we were able to build to it. And it's important that you're not just making it up as you go and then just, get to a mindless ending. So the benefits of a good ending are it culminates the action, obviously, the whole action through line of the story. It fulfills your quest, your hero's quest. It answers that big question you asked in Act 1, and it rewards the audience love affair with your central character or characters if you've done your job with the previous point of creating fantastic characters that an audience can fall in love with. Do you know your ending already for your story? Here's one of the ending shots of our film. The kids are with their new aunt and uncle and their kids in church, right in the front row. And for the first time in a long time, they felt safe and they felt at home, and they're in the bosom of this just village church where they're loved on. And we knew we could get to that. And so when you have that ending, you can build to it. All right? You can build to it. All right, this is an interesting one. Do you have your rosebud? And some of you, if you know the movie Citizen Kane, will know what I'm talking about. Others of you, maybe some younger folks who have not seen that movie, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But this is what I believe every story needs. It can become a gimmick, and you don't want it to be that, but it can be very, very powerful. I want to show you a few examples of that. A rosebud is that central object or token or souvenir or memento that serves as kind of a golden thread woven through your story, your storyline. It symbolizes your hero's central goal of the quest or the journey. It can become a lost or hoped for ideal in the storyline. It can also be the object of your biggest fear, and it can also be a reward. So for going on the journey for your hero, for the quest. In our case with Journey to Jamaa, I bet you can guess that the rosebud in our story was the box, right? It was the object of their biggest fear, and yet it was also the central goal of their journey, going on this journey to find a new home. They could not leave home without their mama. And so that rosebud in our movie was the box, the mysterious box on wheels. In the movie Citizen Kane, which you all must see if you have not seen it, it's required for anybody who's ever taken one of my workshops. In Citizen Kane, Rosebud was the name of Kane's boyhood sled. It represented the purity and innocence of his childhood, the last time he could actually remember being happy. If you know the story, excuse me, of Citizen Kane, it's loosely, legally based on William Randolph Hearst's life, the huge billionaire publisher of all the newspapers and magazines across the country back in the early 1900s, and he and so Citizen Kane as a boy had lost his sled, Rosebud, and on his deathbed, it was the only thing that mattered to him, even though he had established himself as his fortune and his legacy and his status as a kingmaker in the world. Nothing else mattered to him because he had so wasted his life. And so Rosebud is the Rosebud in Citizen Kane. Obviously, that's where I'm getting that idea. So I'm sure you've all seen Inception, the fantastic movie. The spinning top is Cobb's Rosebud in that film. Whether it's spinning or not is the only evidence that Cobb has to tell him if he's still dreaming in that 7 layers of dreams or if he's back in the real world. But it also represented for him his last connection to the real world. Right? It's like a lifeline to pull himself back from the brink. And and this also had a gas factor. If you saw this movie, the first time I saw it, the whole theater gasped when that top started to wobble, and it was the last shot in the film. And it had a great gas factor along with the fact of that was Cobb's Rosebud lifeline. I don't know if too many people remember Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Fantastic movie. Also required viewing for anybody who wants to be around me. But the white straw hat of LaForge, the man who was pursuing them, who was hunting Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and who was going to follow them to the ends of the earth, represented for them their greatest fear. These guys were fantastic bank robbers and gunmen. They had, they were arrogant, and they had, made over $1 million historically from all their bank robberies. But the man in the white straw hat, that is not a scary looking hat, right? It looks like a guy from a barbershop quartet. But this hat, and you rarely see this man. You just see the hat. And he's constantly pursuing these guys. And it becomes their rosebud. It becomes the object of their deepest fear. Imagine 2 hardened outlaws afraid of a white straw hat. It makes no sense, but that became their rosebud. Here's a creepy one. Now, some people might argue with me on this, but I really feel like in the Passion that this androgynous, representation of Satan, the woman. It's got the strange voice, kind of a man's voice, and then this creepy old man baby she was carrying sort of represents the looming specter of Satan and his demons operating on the earthly plane. And, where only Jesus seemed to be able to see them, right? So they're operating on behind the veil, really. They symbolize the eternal fear we have of the spiritual battle in the realm that exists just beyond the veil. So I really feel like that was sort of what Gibson was using, and I think this satanic character appears 3 or 4 times in the story, and the baby only, I think, shows up 1 time. But it was one of those. That was also a gasper when I remember seeing the film for the first time. We had already established the satanic character, and then all of a sudden she shows up with this old man in her arms. Very, very cool. Very cool, very strange. The last rosebud I want to tell you about is the box of kisses in a movie called Cinema Paradiso. Again, another movie. It's a foreign film, won Best Foreign Film of 1989 in the Academy Awards. It's one of my favorite films of all time. But this box of kisses is the rosebud in Cinema Paradiso, and it's a bunch of kisses that were clipped out by the priest in the town. At the town projectionists at the cinema, at the movie theater in this little Sicilian town, that would have to show all the movies to the priest. And the priest would always censor them, and he would have to cut out the kisses from the print that came from, that was sent to the projectionist. And so he kept those kisses. And at the end, little Toto, at the death of his best friend, Fredo, Toto, as a grown-up, goes back for Fredo's funeral, and he's given this box of clips, of film clips. They're just little pieces, fragments of film, but they represent for him a return to the innocence of his youth, the joy of first love, because that's where he first fell in love when he was a teenager, and the celebration of community, because that cinema was the one place where they all went, and it was where they celebrated community. My last point, and then we'll get to questions, is, are you communicating a transcendent theme? How do you know if you have a good story? Are you communicating a transcendent theme? From the beginning of time, this is what children have asked their parents. You can all tell me before I even switch slides. Tell me a story. Why is that? Why do people love stories so much? Throughout history, human beings have responded to common themes or meta messages in stories. This has been the case going back 4,000 years. You could look at all of the great epic poems, the epic of Gilgamesh, and in the ancient civilization of Sumeria, and they all have meta messages that are transcendent. Stories about forgiveness, sacrifice, redemption, even resurrection. Resurrection goes back prior to Jesus in storytelling. If you read the book The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, you will recognize these themes as threads in all the great stories of all time. People love stories that explore transcendent themes because we're hardwired for them. I believe, the human beings are hardwired for meaning in their stories. We have violin strings running through us, through our souls. When they're plucked, they resonate with those themes, and you can find this anywhere you go, any culture you go to. These transcendence themes will resonate with human nature. That's why C.S. Lewis called Christ the myth that became true, because that sacrifice story, that resurrection story, people were hardwired for it, even before Jesus walked to the earth and God sent his son. The myth that became true. Transcendent themes are heavenly truths set in the middle of our human circumstances. And isn't that what parables were all about? Isn't that what the parables of Jesus were? So anyway, that's my presentation, guys, and we can get to your Q&A now, if you'd like, if we have time for that. We have, looks like about.
Yes. Hey, I'll jump in, Travis, for just a second. Here's what I'm going to do in terms of protocol is I'm going to unmute the call-in people just because I don't know how they do it from their phones. So unless I see some background noise coming from somebody, otherwise anybody else who's doing it via the computer can just go ahead and hit their unmute button, or even I think if you right-click over your name, you can, somehow there's a way to like raise your hand. But anyway, just go ahead and unclick or unmute if you have a question. And for those call-in users, I've unmuted you. So over to you, Travis, and then I'll take the screen back from you, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have about 13 minutes left, Brian. Wow. Thank you so very much. I'm still writing notes down, still taking...
And Travis, by the way, if anybody would like a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, I'll send it to you guys, and then you can share it with anybody that asks for it.
Yeah, I know I want a copy. So
okay. I might strip out the trailer because it's a pretty heavy file, so I'll just put a link to where you can go to that trailer on that page.
And really quickly on that note too, we're recording this. Well, we didn't record the whole session, but we got your presentation part of it, Brian, so that will be available as everybody viewed it. So we'll make all of that available.
Awesome. Great. So, but wow, there was just so much there. Let's see, what was the one big note? Oh, something I wanted to add too, Brian. I read this quote not too long ago. In a movie, the director is the God. In documentaries, God is the director.
That's absolutely right.
And I just thought that was so cool, and that really has been inspiration, just asking as I'm working on stories, God, what are those true stories? Because, like you said, real life is stranger than fiction, and the stories are more interesting,
Yeah, they absolutely can be, and you just have to be clever if you're doing it as a narrative piece, an entertaining piece, because some things just don't quite fit.
So let's open up the floor. As of now, I don't think anybody had written anything down in the chat forum. But if you have a question, go ahead. And if we get two people, I'll just moderate that and call on one of you. State your name and then your question, please. Any questions? Well, good. I get to ask all my questions then. Brian, let's see, I have a few. What has been the most exciting part of your filmmaking career, and what's been the least exciting part of your filmmaking career?
It's a great question. It's hard to really pick, because every project you make is like one of your kids, and you love all your kids, right? Some of them are take you on a more wild ride than others. But I do have to say that of all the projects that I've been involved with, making Journey to Jama was probably the most harrowing, but also in a weird way one of the most fulfilling, because we didn't have a lot of money to work with. This was a film that World Vision asked us to make for them, and they were making it with donor dollars, and so they had a limited resources. We did it as really a labor of love, and we probably could never do that again without having taken a little pay because it took a long time. But we were operating in a foreign country and trying to make a movie in a third world country that didn't have a safety net, and also no real film community, so to speak. No film infrastructure there. So we were making a film, sort of flying without a safety net, and when you're working in Hollywood, or at least on bigger productions, there's a safety net there. There's redundancies built in. There's there's a lot of crew and a lot of people kind of watching your back as the writer, producer, director. And for us, it was really crazy having to do everything ourselves. I mean, we had a crew of about 25, but we brought ringers up from South Africa in terms of all the kind of key department positions. But, you know, I was the paymaster. I was walking around in Uganda with $40,000 in my backpack. And, you know, I had to be the paymaster, also the writer and the producer. I had to call and find portable toilets because we were working in a third world country. We were in a village that didn't have running toilets, right? So even for us as crew people, you know, that kind of a hardship, you have to figure out how to solve some of that, because you cannot. If you're a missionary, you can go over there and just fall into the culture, and you can become you can become one of them. But when you're working there for 3 weeks, you very much have to stay healthy, and you can't get sick because there's no margin for error. So anyway, that was probably the most harrowing experience we had.
Hey, Brian, I have a question. You know, I'm sure people on the call too, you know, they have script stories, they hear from others. How do you actually, like, I loved your first point, you know, you gotta get really honest feedback. How do you give really honest feedback? I mean, that's not easy to do.
It's not. And I to be honest with you, I have to be really careful, because I get every day, sort of unsolicited, you know, probably 10 requests from people to read their scripts, and I could do it full time. Personally, I would like to. I wish I didn't have to do my own job sometimes, and I could just help other people. But you know, it's not even possible to give good feedback without spending a significant amount of time looking at, you know, the material and really thinking through it. And so I have to be very careful, because some people don't want to hear the truth. I actually had a dust up with a gentleman recently who is sort of a new person in the business, or he's been sort of kicking around for a while, but has not been able to get himself, you know, a situation where one of his projects goes forward. And, you know, he's very frustrated by that. And so he had me read one of his projects, and frankly, it just wasn't very good. And I chose to be honest with him and say, look, I just think you're kind of barking up the wrong tree with this. And boy, he could not hear it. He just did not want to hear it.
Now, did you say it was that script, or did you just say, you ain't got the gift, bro?
No, I did not go there. I probably could have, but I didn't want to completely, you know, decimate him. But some people, look, not everybody. I believe that every person, every human being, is born with a tiny strand of God's creative, spiritual DNA in them. You know, we're all created in the image of God, right? And we all have a strand of that DNA, the DNA of the author of the universe. But that doesn't mean that we all have the same strand. And unfortunately, the film business is so, for lack of a better term, sexy, that everybody and his brother wants to be involved, and they all sort of, wish they could do it. And I don't think the YouTube sort of experience has helped that at all. It actually has created more demand for more people wanting their 15 minutes of fame. And unfortunately, not everybody can do it. Not everybody is supposed to do it. Maybe they're not supposed to be writers. Maybe they're supposed to do some other facet of the business.
Exactly.
Right. So they need someone in their life to kind of share that with them. And if they're open to that, it's important. Everybody needs a champion in their life to tell them, look them right in the eye and say, you know what, this is what you can do. This is what you should do. I was fortunate enough when I was a kid to have an English, and I was a sophomore in high school, and an English teacher held me back after class, and I thought what happened? I'm busted. What did I do? And she had one of my essays that I had written, and she had given me an A on it. But she also looked me right in the eye, and she said to me, I was 15. She said, "You could do this for a living if you want to." It was like, what? What the heck? Nobody's ever told me that before. I didn't know that, right? Everybody needs a champion in their life to either be honest with them about what they can do, or guide them, give them a gentle nudge away from something that they probably shouldn't do. Right?
Hey, Travis, there are two more questions. Maybe you could do those, and then we could just do a wrap up with an announcement about the next thing we do.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. We have one question from Carmi. Let's see. Let me get back to her question. It is, Brian, do you think it's important as an actress to have a story?
Absolutely. In terms of maybe I'm not quite understanding the question, but for an actress to be able to become a screenwriter, or for an actress to have a personal story. Maybe that's the refinement I would need on that.
Carmi, do you want a personal story? She says.
Okay. Look, the only thing that actors have to go on, right, when they're trying to do their craft is a few things. One is personal experience, and the other thing is imagination, right? If you don't have a personal story that you can draw on, it's very difficult to put yourself into the shoes of another human being in the middle of a movie, in the middle of a story. And so I think it's very important for an actor to really, write their story out, absolutely, and know it, right? All of those experiences in life, the hardships, the pains, the tragedies, because you need to be able to rely on those things when you're in the middle of somebody else's story. You need to be able to fall back on those things so that you can put yourself in the shoes of that actor. So it's a great question. Great question.
Thanks, Carmi. For your rosebud, do you always suggest that a physical object, it should be a physical object that symbolizes the quest?
Well, I suppose there's latitude for not having it be a physical object, but I think once you now that folks are thinking about that idea, every movie you go to, you're going to find a rosebud in it, and it's going to be a physical object, right? Now, perhaps it's not, but it's probably been physical at some point. Even if somebody's quoting a poem, right? It was probably written at some point. So in a journal, or it was handed to somebody in a letter. So, no. The answer is no. There's not a strict rule there, but I think that it's the most common thing you're gonna see is somebody using a physical object, because it's a visual medium, right? Show, not tell, right? I would much rather see it than hear about it.
And Travis, there's one more question up above that one. That's from actually from MK, but could you read that one?
Perfect. Brian, do you feel that there is a significant, strong market for international features based on true stories?
I do. I absolutely do. As long as there are thriller elements to the storytelling. I don't know that our movie Journey to Jamaa would have strong commercial interest as a feature, right? If you were making it as a 100-minute feature that you wanted to go into theaters, we certainly, when we were making it, we wish we could do more than a 40-page script, because it was such a powerful experience. But yeah, I suppose there is a market for it. I think there is a market for almost anything these days, as long as the budgets are modest, right?
Right.
But if you notice, the big commercial hits that are international thrillers, that are international themed stories, are thrillers. Yeah. Zero Dark 30, it's a thriller. The International, the banking, thriller. Constant Gardener. Unless it's a biopic like the Last King of Scotland was, But but there are, movies like Marigold, the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, which is a fantastic movie that is very much a character study, and yet that was very successful. So yeah, I believe there is a market for international stories. I mean, I personally think that certain international stories are really important for American culture to experience. Absolutely. So, given the fact that people are now having the ability to get their films seen in other ways as opposed to just studios financing, putting big P&A up for them, I think there's a coming with the digital revolution is going to be a whole host of ways for people to get their movies seen.
Speaking of that, Brian, the follow-up question to that was, do you have any suggested distribution plans or directions for an international movie, I guess?
For an international movie. Boy, I guess it's really hard to know. It depends on, the elements that movie has. I mean, if there are any actors of note in the movie, then...
And I'm going to jump in, Brian, because I got a private message from Matthew, MK, that particularly he was thinking of stories of faith. Like, are there like faith stories that are going to have an international audience, to your knowledge?
Look, my last point, does it have a transcendent theme? I think that I don't know that like overt gospel films are going to have a huge audience, commercially. Mm-hmm. As we've seen sort of the breakouts happen in America with some of the faith-based films from the Sherwood Baptist guys. Those are more sermons sort of on cinema. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's a massive commercial audience for an international sermon on cinema, mm-hmm. but I do believe that the transcendent values that I was talking about are always, all good movies have them. All good movies have stories of redemption. Most movies have a redemption story in them. So it's really about how overt we are. One of the best international films of all time, in my opinion, is a movie called The Mission. And it's another film that I recommend everybody needs to see. But it actually, was made by non-Christians. It actually has the most powerful representation of the gospel of any movie I've ever seen. And it needs to be looked at. But there's no overt altar call, salvation message scene, but it has the most powerful depiction of the cross that I have ever seen, of the redemption of the cross that I've ever seen.
Awesome. Hey, Travis, we're over time, bro. And Brian, thank you. But Travis, can you just wrap us up and just mention the next one?
Yeah, definitely, Brian. Thanks again so very much. What a wealth of information you passed on. The thing I would like to say too real quick is simply, guys, just keep going. If you're serious about this, have people read it, ask them to give you their opinion on it. And if you're getting, wow, I really liked it more often than not, then keep going with it. If you're getting a lot of, it was okay, or they're not enthusiastic about it, keep working on it. So, yeah, adding Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Citizen Kane, Cinema Paradiso to your films to watch definitely will be a good idea. Our next webinar, part 2, will be, February. Clyde, I've lost my notes there.
I think it's the 28th, but each time you have to sign up each time for the next one. So it's at least first come, first serve each time. We'll have it up online. Yeah,
and we'll have that up online really in the next few days. That'll be with David Nixon, How to Entertain and Engage Spiritually. So thank you so very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you may be in the universe, and God bless.
All right. Thanks to all. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.